By the 1800s, many people traveled by horse and buggy, making travel long, hard, and often dangerous. The Transcontinental Railroad would make traveling easier and shorter. Building a railroad would solve this problem. President Lincoln came up with a plan for building a railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad is linking the Union and Pacific Railroads. This project would cost over $2 billion. In 1845, the New York entrepreneur Asa Whitney presented a resolution in Congress proposing the federal funding of a railroad that would stretch to the Pacific. Lobbying efforts over the next several years failed due to growing sectionalism in Congress, but the idea remained a potent one. In 1860, a young engineer named Theodore Judah identified the infamous Donner Pass in the Northern California was an ideal location for constructing the railroad through the formidable Sierra Nevada mountains.
Omaha, Nebraska is where the railroad started. The railroad was off to a slow start with the lack of money. It finally began in 1866. The Big Four are Leland Stanford, Collis P. Huntington, Charles Croker, and Mark Hopkins. Stanford was given credit for starting the railroad. Mark Hopkins was treasurer of the Pacific Railroad Company.
Many of the workers working on the railroad were Chinese. The Chinese were easier to ship than Americans across America. Many of the Chinese immigrants died during the construction of the railroad. Chinese immigrants weren't treated fair. They worked longer than the whites and got paid less. They were only paid $25 a month, while the whites got paid $35. This is Theodore Judah. Theodore would go to the mountains and see where the track should be laid. He went 23 times into the mountain peaks, then decided to blow a part out so the track would go through. Once Judah had decided where to blow up the mountain for the tracks to be laid, he had the Chinese blow it up using nitroglycerin. This was very dangerous and explosive. Some of the Chinese even died.
The railroad was coming along. The work on the railroad was progressing until silver was discovered in Nevada in 1865. A lot of the white workers left the railroad to search for silver. Travel on the new railroad began 5 days after its completion. The first route was taken from Omaha, Nebraska, to Sacramento, California. Rail cars had begun using the route.
The last tie is being laid. People are coming to celebrate the new railroad. A more efficient track has been laid. Promontory, Utah is considered the most important landmark in the building of the railroad. On May 10, 1869, Promontory Point is where the two railroads were joined. It signifies the completion of one of the most historical events in the United States.
Each day they laid 10 miles of track. They decided on Promontory Summit, north of the Great Salt Lake, some 690 tracks away from Sacramento, and 1,086 from Omaha. The last rail at Promontory Point was hammered together with bronze and gold spike. Promontory Point is where the two ends finally met. The east and the west were finally one.
After 6 years in the building of the railroad, a telegrapher sent the simple message, "Done. Traveling on the railroad will begin."
Before building the Transcontinental Railroad, it cost nearly $1,000 to travel across the country. After the railroad was completed, the price dropped to $150.